guys, welcome back to Ashart Books. So today I thought I'd do a little bit of a different video, and I'm gonna kind of talk about my reading journey, or I'm not exactly sure what I'm gonna title this video, but basically just talking about when I started reading and kind of how my reading has changed over the years. I don't think I've ever done this video, but I find them so fascinating to watch on other people's channels, so I thought I would do one myself. So I started reading at a really young age and loving books. My mom is a big reader, so my brother and I both growing up were always readers. One of my favorite things to do as a child, and still today, is to go to the library and get to check out like a stack of books. Like whatever the max amount of books was as a child, like picture books, I feel like that is how many I checked out. I love the library. I love that it was free. You know, you can bring your kids there and spend a couple of hours, you know, without spending any money. And I think that really is part of what really made me just love books in general, is that early kind of love of going there. So that was probably where it started. My mom always read to us as kids, so we both grew up with that love of it. Obviously you start with picture books, but I was a pretty good reader, so I started reading kind of like small chapter books pretty young. So I thought I'd kind of give a few of my favorite series that I remember from when I was a little bit older. So one of the first series that I love, and I still love today, is the Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, which there's also a TV show based off of the books. I just love them. I read all of them. I was obsessed with them. I would go back and get them. I know I checked them out like multiple times from the library. And I just found it so fascinating. If anyone has ever read that series or watched the TV show, please let me know, because I feel like it's a series that I don't hear too many people talk about. But it's just such a good family series, you know, you don't have to worry about anything kind of bad that your kids are gonna read. And I just was obsessed with like Laura and Pa and Ma and everything like that. So that was a favorite. Another favorite when I got a little bit older was The Babysitter's Club. I was a huge fan of The Babysitter's Club, and I just love them. They were one of the first books that I remember buying. I don't know where they're at, but I know I own some of them. And it's funny because I've got one story that, you know, when you remember really random memories from when you were a kid and you don't know why that one stuck. There's one where I know I got a new Babysitter's Club book. I think it was one of the ones I actually got to buy, because we didn't always buy books when I was a kid until I got a little bit older. Probably when I started spending my own money on them, but my parents were always really good about letting us buy books. I will say that was one thing that, you know, if your kids want to read, let them buy the book. One memory I like very distinctly remember is we had a babysitter, my brother and I, and we didn't have babysitters that often as a kid, but it was one of our neighbors, and I was probably like 10-ish, I think, maybe. And I got a new book from the Babysitter's Club, and I sat on the couch, and I don't think I moved the entire night. This is where my like reading in one sitting came from. I sat on the couch and I read that thing the entire night. And I remember finishing it, and I remember our babysitter coming and saying, "Are you okay? Like, you haven't really moved or done much." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm fine. This is great." I think I was the easiest child to babysit ever, because I mean, I wasn't doing anything but reading. So I don't know why that memory just stuck in my head, but like that's still one of my favorite things to do, is to be able to like read a book in one sitting without getting interrupted, and it's fabulous. Another series that I read a lot of was the Nancy Drew books. These were a favorite of my mom's. She's a big mystery reader, so for me, it definitely was like a pass it on down the line type of thing, and I definitely still have them somewhere, a set of some of the Nancy Drews, not all of them because there's a lot of them, but I love those. It's funny, I'm not a big mystery reader now, but like I can handle Nancy Drew because that is about the level of scary I can handle. So love Nancy Drew. I saw that there's a new show coming out with Nancy Drew on, I think, the CW in the fall, which I am very excited to check out because it's just a fan favorite. I think it's gonna be really cool to see that. So obviously then you kind of move on past the smaller chapter books to actual, like, I guess what we call like YA today, which it wasn't really the same YA when I was younger. It kind of started to be like towards my late teens. There really wasn't a time I never read. I was trying to think back. I don't think there was. There were definitely years I think I read more than others, but not necessarily ever a time when I just flat out didn't read like at all for the entire year. I think it was always an escape for me. It was always, not that there was even anything bad going on, but you know, whatever it was going on in life, reading has always been kind of an escape to go into someone else's life and kind of try out new things. I was always a pretty shy child as well. So I think being able to go places and do things through a book always was the way that I like to do it, rather than maybe necessarily like going out. You know, I think when you are that shy of a person, it can be really hard to go out and kind of put yourself out there. So I think reading definitely let me kind of explore and learn new things, and that's definitely where like my love of history and things like that came from. So as I got older, I definitely got into more like YA books, and that's really where I started reading a lot of like YA fantasy type books, or like urban fantasy. And the one series, well, a couple of the series, but one of the ones that I know I started reading, I very vividly remember in high school when I was, I think, a junior, is The Mortal Instruments. I believe at that time only the first one was out, or the first and the second. So I read those like as they came out, which it's funny, I don't think very many people have. I think a lot of people kind of jumped on a little bit later, which is awesome too. But like, I just remember reading I think it was the first two over spring break one year, and then I was so like enamored and I needed to get the next one, and it wasn't out yet. So I remember when City of Glass came out, and I love that series. That's why it kind of holds a special place in my heart, because I feel like I hadn't really been that attached to like a fantasy series before that one. I just love that series. So yeah, Mortal Instruments definitely. And then as well as that, I actually just thought about it though, and both what I read, I think right before that or around the same time, was Twilight. I have to look at the years to know exactly which one came out first, but I loved Twilight. It was a favorite. I mean, you can say what you want about the series, but it made people read, and it made me fall in love with like vampires and all this like fantasy stuff and werewolves, and I loved it. I was completely enamored. I remember a friend of mine in school kept telling me to read the first book, and I wasn't sure about it. Like, I hadn't heard that much about it, and I remember she gave it to me as a Christmas present that year. I think it was I think this did come first, because I think I got that my sophomore year of high school. And ever since then, I mean, it was like an obsession. And then the movies came out, and it was a whole phenomenon. And it's kind of fun to think that like you were there during that. But any book that makes teenagers read, I think, is a good thing, and I'm not sure how people could ever see that as a bad thing. So I loved Twilight, and honestly, I still kind of want to go back and reread the books, because I feel like I might still like them. So I'd say like Twilight and The Mortal Instruments were the two like huge series that I got kind of obsessed with during like late high school years. So then I went to college, and I still was reading. I definitely brought like a drawer full of books to my dorm room. I was that person. And I always had like a bookshelf in my like college dorm and all that stuff. But what I got in college that really kind of like, I'd say changed things in a way, was I got a Kindle. And I had never had a Kindle. They really weren't out before. And I was obsessed. I loved the Kindle because there were so many like self-published authors that you could get for really cheap on Kindle books that I'd never heard of, and they were just like the tip of your finger. I love that you didn't have to go anywhere. You could just like one tap that puppy. So that was kind of when I started reading a little bit more romance. Not completely. I've always loved the romance in books. Like, that's always been my favorite part in like YA or fantasy, and I didn't like completely stop reading YA, but I kind of dipped my toe in it just because a lot of the self-published books, but there were so many amazing authors that were self-published then and have since kind of become you know, published authors like Jamie Maguire, Beautiful Disaster. I'm trying to think, like Abby Klein. She was one of the first authors I read on there. There were a few others like in that like new adult genre that really was kind of emerging at that time, and I loved it. So as the Kindle books kind of became bigger, I definitely started reading a lot more romance like on my Kindle, and then I was reading a lot of fantasy and YA in like physical book. I don't think it was necessarily for a specific reason. I just think a lot of times it was cheaper on the Kindle. So then obviously I was out of college, I was like living on my own. So obviously then I, you know, got older, and I think over the years, as I kind of went through my like early 20s to mid-20s is when I kind of started reading a lot more romance. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I just felt a little bit not too old, because you definitely don't have to be young to read YA, but I just was having a harder time relating to the characters, especially in like the YA romances, just because, you know, I wasn't 17 anymore, and sometimes that was harder for me. Now, I still loved a good YA fantasy. I still love a good YA fantasy now, but some of the contemporaries were a little bit trickier. So that's when I kind of started reading a lot more contemporary romances, especially on my Kindle, and really started getting into them. I also think as I got older, I kind of stopped caring as far as like, you know, that whole like, I think a lot of people kind of judge romance books, and if you're reading a romance, like, is it a good book? So I think as I got older, I just stopped caring what people thought as far as that went, and I just started reading what I wanted to read, and a lot of that was romance. So that's kind of how that shifted, and I discovered a lot of the like self-published authors, and then obviously published authors as well along the way. And it's so funny to like think about how it kind of like rolled into it, kind of it. And then the last thing was really discovering historical romance, which was only a couple of years ago. It was pretty much right after I started this channel, which will be 2 years in July. I had loved contemporary romance, read a lot of it, but I had never really read too much historicals. And I'm not gonna lie, it was mostly because I thought the covers were a little cringeworthy. Since then, I have completely accepted them, and I just don't really care anymore. But at the time, you know, the mass market paperbacks, I never really read. That was always something that, like, I always saw like my grandma or my mom or someone like that read, and I didn't know. The first author I ever read, though, was Lisa Kleypas. When she had, I think it was Devil in Spring. Well, it was actually, so like I said, it was only like a year and a half, 2 years ago that I started reading historicals, and I went down the rabbit hole. Like, that was like all I read for like 6 months was historical romance, and I loved it. It's such a good fit for me. I'm a huge history nerd. I love history, and I love like period dramas on TV. So honestly, it's that with romance in a book. It's the perfect marriage. So that's kind of like the most recent thing I've fell in love with. And I still, obviously you guys know, love historical romance today. I still read everything else though. I still love YA. I still love some contemporaries, but I've just kind of gotten a little bit better at picking up things that I love and don't really care as much what people are like thinking, or if I'm reading like the cool book. So hopefully you guys found this video somewhat entertaining, but that was kind of the like reading journey that I've had in my life. I'm sure I will continue to kind of grow and try new things and to try new books, new authors, but that's kind of where I started and where I'm at now. So I would love to know, because I'm so fascinated by this, where you guys, how your reading is. I would love to know, because I find this so fascinating, how you guys have kind of learned to love to read. I know some people didn't start reading until they were in their 20s or 30s. Some have read since they were like 4. I'd absolutely love to know that. Let me know down below, like, what was your favorite book as a teenager, or what series really got you into reading, and I think it's so fascinating. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!